Hi, I'm Corey. Welcome to Creating with Scraps. This is a how-to video for the Life Simplified Journal Organizer Planner that I had talked to you about, and I had originally intended to create the journal first. But I realized something. If you're wanting to put the flower press insert in that I had mentioned and shown, we want to make the flower press insert first because you put that into the signature before you put the signature into the journal. So I'm going to do that now. This is the how-to for the flower press insert. Now, the flower press insert is based on, well, let me show you what it is first. For this particular journal, it is just 2 pieces of chipboard, or 4 pieces of chipboard, too thin, too thick, covered in this case with paper, with some baking or parchment paper inside. And the idea is inside this Life Organized journal, Life Simplified, part of the organization process, like if you go out and about and you're picking some flowers or some leaves or something you wanted to preserve, this will be right inside the journal in the center. And that's what the parchment paper's for, so that whatever is maybe on the leaf or flowers won't stain the paper here. Now, I didn't seal this yet. This is just regular printed paper, copy paper. But I will, before I insert it, cover it with Tim Holtz Distress Collage Medium because it dries clear and completely not sticky. And any ink or things that you might get on the paper will be clean offable or wipe offable. So I haven't sealed it, but I probably will. But the idea is there's a spine right here that you can sew directly into the signature. So when I'm ready to put this into the journal, all I have to do is line it up on my background or my insert piece, and then I'll sew it on my machine, but you could certainly sew it by hand or whichever method you most prefer putting in your signatures. And I'll sew it down like this, and then it's ready to be sewn right into the journal. So that's what it is. And I didn't want a pocket or a decoration or anything on this one because, again, this is a really simple journal for the Life Simplified planner, and I don't want bulk. There's going to be bulk because that's how I make them, but I don't want additional bulk. But I thought, if you wanted to put a pocket or a doily or ribbon or something on it, you would want to do that prior to gluing anything else. So I wanted to mention that now. So essentially, this is what we're going to be making, and I will show you how we do it. It is based on, and I will try to remember to link it below, a video I saw a couple years ago by Jibid Neary, Jibidneary. And I purchased one from her, and it's a flower press. And this one uses playing cards, beautiful cross-stitch playing cards. Well, let's see if I can get my fingers to cooperate. And has a wraparound, here we go, a wraparound system to hold this closed. It uses, this particular one uses seam binding. So there's seam binding right here. She's got a little bit of paper inside. She uses a paper, and basically it's chipboard with paper on the front, and she used playing cards on the back. And you put your flower that you're going to press right in here, close it, and then wrap this around, and it holds it tight. Now, because this is in the center of a signature of a journal, you obviously can't do that wraparound bit. You could have it loose and not part of the journal itself, and then use this and tuck it into a pocket, and that would work just fine. But I wanted to create one to put inside the journal to be an absolute part of the journal. And I had made and shared these based on Jibid's idea, and these use the Tim Holtz photos, people photos. And I did them a couple different ways. And instead of, she used seam binding, and I used lace. And lace around the edges. So it was one of my little bits of lace for last year. But it's all based on Jibid's idea. And I'm going to show you how I altered it to work for an insert for our Life Simplified journal. I love adding pressed flowers to my pieces. And if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I've done it many, many times. And this is one way that I do it. All right, and I made this pocket to put on first, so I can show you in case that's a step that you want to take. This one uses just a little bit different. I mean, we use our standard craft supplies, of course, but if you're going to use fabric for the flower press insert or the spine of the flower press insert, you don't need Tyvek. But if you are going to use paper, I highly recommend using Tyvek. And Tyvek is, well, I'm sure there's more than one kind, but this is just basically an envelope with lots of, I don't know if you can see through there, see it there, but lots of fibers in it. It's super strong. Like, here you go. I cannot tear this. I can cut it, but I can't tear this. So with constant opening and closing like you're going to get in a spine of a signature, Tyvek is just really super, it's really thin, just like regular paper, but it's got those fibers in there that make it super strong. So it helps so that you don't tear your paper and pull things out. So I would highly encourage using Tyvek. We're going to use paper today simply because that's what I did on the sample. And so I cut a strip of Tyvek off of that. Like I said, this is an envelope, a recycled envelope. I just cut a strip off to put inside there. So we're going to use Tyvek. I'm going to use lace simply because I had some of this out. So I'm going to use some lace, but you can use seam binding. You can use string. You can use yarn. I'm sure there's other materials you could use, just what you want. And the idea is to make it long enough so that because we can't wrap it around, we're going to be able to tie it closed. And so I put these on here and then just to tie it closed. These are really thin for this, but it'll work well because, again, this is going to be in the center of my signature. And so the papers in front of it and behind it will also help compress this and keep it closed. Let's see. I use an old knitting needle. You don't have to. You can use anything. You can use a pencil or a pen or anything that's even flat and straight. But when you're putting the pieces together, it is real. You can even use a piece of chipboard cut to the right dimension. It is really helpful to have something to put right here in the middle to make sure that your pieces, your right and left side pieces, are equidistant and that they don't get a little wonky or off. So having something as a spacer is hugely helpful. The other thing I use that's just a little bit different is this particular tool. When I cover chipboard and wrap the edges, I use this colorwayarts.com. Oh, can you see that? Here you go. Colorwayarts.com is where I purchased it. And it's just a journal cover corner piece. If you don't have this or have some or want to purchase something like this, I do it simply because it makes it easy. But the distance from the corner that goes on the edge of the journal to where you're cutting the paper to wrap it, this distance right here is 1/8 of an inch. So just something to keep in mind as you're wrapping your own journal. All right, to speed things up a little bit, I cut the pieces for this journal, which is a little bit smaller than the one I made, but it's the same idea. All this is yo-yos that have been sewn down to some canvas. And this will be the cover for a mini journal. And then I'll put another piece of canvas on the inside as the spine liner. These are going to be soft journals, kind of like this one. This, believe it or not, is a soft journal. I've just got lots and lots of stuff in it. And the spine is soft and it rolls really nicely, which allows me to lay things flat, which is absolutely what I wanted for my Life Simplified journal. So that's the reason for it. It does not have a chipboard spine. It does not have chipboard in here. It's just, I've got thin. In fact, when I glued the whole piece together, so here before I put the canvas in here, I used something exactly like what I've got here and just a bit of file folder to just make it a little bit, a little bit sturdier. But it is not hard or hard-backed. And it's based on that journal. Oh, sorry, I was dropping some things. Okay, so I have already cut the pieces and I'll show you what I've got. And we're making the insert, the flower press insert for this particular size journal. I'm using, mine are 6 by 4 1/4, but whatever journal you're making, you're going to want to cut your chipboard pieces to fit that. Now you can see here on the sample, I didn't cut it to the same height and width. It is a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter, about 1/2 inch all the way around. And I did that for several reasons, but mostly so that when I tie it, I have room in here to tie it and that it's not right up to the edges. Just gives me a little bit of wiggle room. If you want to make it exactly the same size, you can. It just makes it a little bit trickier when you're sewing it in. You have to be a little bit more precise. This one is not a super precise project. All right, so I'm going to get the materials. Now I'm using this here to cut the glare, and the new silicone mat that I've ordered hasn't arrived yet. But you can also use, so I'm using chipboard, and this chipboard is a bit thicker. I bought it at a yard sale quite a while ago. I mean, it's not super thick. You can see it's still flimsy and flexible, but it is pretty thick. It's probably between an 1/8 and a 1/16 inch thick. Whereas this is just, let's see if I've got it here. This was just a mailer. I think some paper that I ordered came in this, and I recycled this. For the 4 pieces that you're going to cut, you want 2 a little bit thicker and 2 a little bit thinner. Now, if you do 4 thick and 4 thin, will it work? Sure. But for bulk and stability, I wanted the outside pieces just to be a little bit thicker. And you can see here, these aren't exactly the same thickness, but they don't need to be. So these 2 will be the outside cover, and these 2 will be the inside cover. And that will allow us to make the press. So you need 4 pieces. Just a note, the inside pieces, rather than cutting them 6 by 4 1/4, I cut it, say, maybe 5 7/8 by 4 3/8 or something. No, 3/8, just something like that. No, 1/4 is 2/8, so maybe 4 1/8. They're just slightly smaller than the thick pieces. That's really what it boils down to. They're just slightly smaller, so that when they're on the inside, you have a tiny smidge of a lip all the way around. You don't have to worry about it overlapping. If you cut them exactly the same size, that'll work as well. Okay, and then here's the Tyvek for the spine. And then just to save time, I cut the pieces. This is just regular Epson copy paper. It's the matte medium copy paper. It just gives me a little bit better quality print, but you can see it's thin paper. It's not card. And my first step, if I wanted to put a pocket on, this is where I would put the pocket on. So I've got a piece for either the front or the back, and I've got my pocket here, and I would sew my pocket on. Now, when I use this kind of material, I often put coffee dyed tracing paper or vellum on the back, because what happens when you put a card in and out with lace or this, it sometimes catches on these little itty bitty holes. And the crinkle is kind of cool, but I also back it so that I don't catch it. So if I were going to put a pocket on, I would put that on first. I like to sew these, but if you're going to glue it, it doesn't really matter when you're going to put it on. But if I were going to sew it, I would do it right now. So just wanted to bring that up and put that out there. All right, this paper, for anybody who asks, is from Tracy Fox Creative or Love Junk Journals Compendium 3 kit. And it's one of the background pages that she had. I chose it simply because I liked, oh, and I just dropped a bunch of stuff. Well, great. I really liked the way the colors worked with the yo-yos, the feed sack yo-yos that I've got. So that's why I chose it. You can use whatever you've got in any pattern and in any material. You can use cardboard, or not cardboard. You can use card if you want to. I just find this is sturdy enough and it's easy to fold and work with, so that's why I'm using it. All right, I'm going to put that aside, and here are my 4 pieces. So I've got the 2 thicker pieces. I'm going to glue those first, and then I'm going to glue them onto the chipboard. This is just my glue paper. I don't want to get glue all over that file folder, and I hope that's in place. All right, so I'm going to use my glue paper and the chipboard that I've cut. Sorry, it wiggles. And I'm going to put glue stick, a decent layer but not super thick, all over the back of this, or one side of this. If you've got a glossy side, if your chipboard has a glossy side, I would encourage putting the glossy side, gluing that first, and then I'm just going to put it right here in the center of my paper that I had cut. And then what I do is I take an ice scraper. You can use whatever you want. And I make sure I have no air bubbles in the front of the paper. I want it nice and smooth. And I'm going to put this over here with some magnets just to hold it in place while I glue the others. Okay, so just kind of holding it there and encouraging it to stay where it's supposed to. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece of thicker chipboard. Now you can see here I didn't give it a perfect edge. That's okay, it's not going to show. I should have trimmed it down, but I didn't realize that I had done that. To cut this chipboard, you can use X-Acto knife, but I use the Tim Holtz Tonic Studio Heavy Duty Trimmer, and it works fabulously to cut that. Obviously I didn't cut that one, but you can see the other edges cut it just fine. You don't have to use that. You can use a regular trimmer, but a standard trimmer like the Fiskars trimmer and such won't cut that. It's just a little bit too thick. You'd have to do several passes, but it works just fine with an X-Acto knife. Okay, so I don't have to be careful about which direction the paper, this is directional paper, but I don't have to be careful about that right now because I'm just covering these pieces. And I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure there's no air bubbles. It's just easier to do that now than later. Okay, and I'll glue this one. This one should be good. And I'm going to do the same thing with the two thinner pieces. Cover it with glue. Now, see here, this one has a shinier side, so I'm going to put the glue on the shinier side. That way, the matte side is going to be glued to the matte side, and it'll just stay a little bit easier because these are going to be wrapped. But I am going to put the glue all the way around. And here, I'll just move this over, and I'll put it on the inside of the paper, or the back side. See, this isn't two-sided paper. And I'll flip it around again. And press down. I know that's not perfectly in frame, but I'm showing you the same thing I did with the other pieces. I'll move them to the side, glue them, and put the mat down. And the last one, I'm going to glue the shiny or glossy side to the paper. Okay, and that's all the glue is stuck there. I'll move this out of the way and glue it to my background, to my cover paper. And I did it about the center of the paper. You want between a quarter and a half an inch or so to wrap the pages, because we're going to wrap the edges of the pages to give us a smooth look. And then I will do the same thing. Put this down, let the magnet hold it in place while the glue dries. Corners especially, I like to do that with. These are the inside, so it's not as crucial, but it's just easier to do. All right, next, here's my cutting mat and my X-Acto knife. And here is that Colorway Arts corner bit. I lay this on the corner of my chipboard, and you can see the top is too long, so it'll go over the edge there, which is fine. And then I'm going to use this as my guideline, and I'll cut off the corners. And I do that for all 16 corners. I'll trim this part down later. It doesn't matter so much, but I just want to make those. And again, the distance between the edge of the paper and the corner is 1/8 of an inch, or roughly 1/8 of an inch. It may not be exactly that. And I'll do that for 4 on each, so 16 total. I suppose I could have had the extras done beforehand, but this will work too. You can see my process. You can use card. It's a little thicker, but it's totally not necessary. So if you've got it, if you're wanting to use rather than a digital, or you can use magazine paper, you can use book page. Book page is thin unless you use an older book, and so keep that in mind. You can use pretty much any paper that you want to cover these. Again, the more fragile the paper, or the more thin the paper, I would consider covering it when you're all done with Tim Holtz Collage Medium. I like the matte. There's glossy too if you prefer that look. Mod Podge can dry tacky or sticky. I've had it happen when I've covered composition books with my students and such, and I've never had the matte medium dry sticky. Now, there's probably other in the art supply materials that you could use and that do the same type of thing, but those are the ones that I'm familiar with. So, you know, use what you have. PVA glue, I find, gets it's a great stick, but it doesn't dry non-sticky, whereas the collage medium does. So, Stamperia may have one. Again, there's probably other companies, art supply companies, that do that and make it. Okay, I've got all of those. Now I'm going to put this away. I don't need my X-Acto knife anymore, though I can still use it, of course. But I'll put that away here, and I'm going to toss all of these. Okay. Now, there were some places where the paper was a little long. It doesn't really matter. It can be a little long, but just for the sake of uniformity, I'm going to trim these down a little bit. I don't need quite that much paper, so I'll trim those down. And let's see, trim a little bit off here. You know, as long as I leave an inch or so, it's more than enough to wrap. And here, I think this one was a little bit long too. Okay, and that's all 4 pieces. And they've all been trimmed. Okay, I'll throw those away. And let's see, make sure that's in there. All right, my next step is to glue the edges. I start with the long edge. I don't know that there's a rule. You don't have to. I keep saying gonna, and I want to stop doing that. I'm going to use my art glitter glue simply because that's what I have on my desk. You can use reptile glue, barely art glue, PVA glue. Maybe Beacon 3-in-1 works. I know a lot of people use that. You know, whatever holds tight that you've had good luck with paper will work just fine. If I'm doing cardstock to cover this, I will take my bone folder and I will score first. Because I'm not using cardstock, because I'm using just thin copy type paper, all I do is I take the fine tip and I bring glue right along that edge. And I do both sides, both longer sides. You can start with the shorter sides if you want, but I have better luck when I work with the longer sides. And then I lay this down flat and I roll it over, just like that. And then I press down so that it's nice and tight. And I'll do the same thing on this side. I lay it down, I'll show you from this angle so you can see it a little better. I lay it down flat and I roll it over and I press it down. And that gives me a tight fit with no bubbles or wrinkles. Now, I'll come in from the underside. Now, you saw this is a little bit longer, and I didn't put glue all the way to the edge. So here, I'll just lift the paper a little bit and put a little bit of glue right under that flap, and I'll push it down. And that way I don't have a lot of glue seeping out. Well, here you can see there was enough, and it held the paper in place just fine. Then I take the 4 corners where that little overlap is, and I put just a dot of glue in each of those 4 corners. And then I come in with the bone folder and I press those down. Then I'll wipe the excess glue off the bone folder because there's always a little bit of seepage. Dries clear, doesn't really matter, but I just don't want the extra glue on there. Oh, and I tore that one. Nice job, Corey. Glue it, push it down, and so I've got all 4 of those corners tucked in, and it'll still work. It'll still work just fine, but you can see I've got all 4 of those corners tucked in and down. And now I'm going to do the same thing and put the shorter sides, that glue just right along the edge, the seam, and glue on the top and the bottom. Oh, I know why that may have torn, because I had this ratty edge here. Do the same thing where I push it down and roll it over like that, and then press, and then the same thing with the other side. Doesn't matter, top or bottom, whatever. Push it down, roll it over, and press. And that gives me 4 sharp corners. And I'll do the same thing I did on the other side. I'll lift up the edge and I'll come in with some glue and I'll push that down. And I do that for all 4. See, I probably could have just done it with 1 rather than doing it all 4 pieces, but well, I did apologize for that. Okay, there is 1. I can clamp the, you know what, while I'm waiting and doing the other pieces, I'll just clamp down with my magnets on those corners, give it an extra time to dry. And I'm going to do the same thing with all 4. Glue and glue. It dries, art glitter glue dries quickly, but it doesn't dry super quickly. So I could conceivably do all the pieces, but then it wouldn't be in frame and yeah, you wouldn't see it. So I'm going to roll and press. And over here, roll and press. Then I'm going to put the dot of glue in all 4 corners. And that just helps hold it in place. And press. You can do the same thing even if you don't have that corner tool. You just slice off the corners with about 1/8 of an inch apart, you know, from the edge of the paper. So if you don't have to have that tool in order to do it. Oh, I forgot to do this part. That's okay, that's an easy fix. Push it down. Same thing on this side. And push it down. Now I'm going to roll those edges just like I did the side edges. Roll and push down. And roll and push down. Some people just lay it flat and lift it up. That works too. I've just had good luck with this, so I continue to do it that way. If you've got a system that works for you to wrap, that's, you know, do what works for you. This is just what works for me. Okay. I got my nails done recently, so they're a little bit thicker than I'm used to. I'm having to adjust again to working with nails. Okay, so that one's done. I'll move this and I'll switch out my magnets. Okay, and here you go. See, this piece is done. And 2 more. Here, I'll do them both at the same time. This is the Tyvek I'm going to use to cover. I'll do 1, 2, 3. Oh, whoops. I smeared that because I was looking this way. That's okay. It's all going to get covered in the end, and it doesn't really matter. 4. Okay. Roll and press. Roll and press. Roll and press. Roll and press. Okay, so there's those, and then this one I guess I had enough glue on. Doesn't really, oh, there we go. Put the glue under that edge. And 2. Three. And 4. So step 1 was to cut the chipboard, the 4 pieces of chipboard to size. Step 2 was to wrap them with paper. So we've done those first 2 steps. And then on this step, glue the corners. You don't have to do this step. I just have better results with it, so I continually do it. Okay. And push those corners in. You can see the glue seeps out. This bone folder's had lots of ink, lots of glue, and it still works just fine. This works for the covers of journals too, if you're using a chipboard cover or not using a fabric cover, or, you know, any kind of paper cover basically. This works just same concept. All right, those 4 are done. 4 corners. Now I'm going to do the 4 shorter flaps. 1, 2, 3 and 4. I want it to go all the way to the edge. Okay. And roll and press, roll and press. And the same thing here. Okay, now I'm going to do this bit here where I put tuck glue under that edge. And on all 4, this one was a lot of need for glue. And I'll swap these out. These 2 are done. And now this one. Okay. Put that aside, and now glue this one. Just to hold this in place while it dries. All right, now I have to be careful because I am going to lay down the thicker pieces of chipboard. So one, I want to make sure I've got the right chipboard that I want to use, and that's these 2. And then 2, because this is directional, there is a print on it, even though it's just part of the background. I want to make sure that I have them all 4 going the same way. There we go. Is that right? It's an angled cursive. Yeah, like this. Sorry. Oh, there you go. These 2 have the same tape thing there. So I'm going to lay these down flat like this. And I'm going to I'll move this to the side. Don't need that anymore. It's dry. So those are my 2, whoops, that went to the magnet. These are my 2 top pieces. I'll push them to the side. These are my 2 bottom pieces, and they're heading in the same direction. I'm going to put this spacer right between them. And now I'm going to use my bar. All right, I'm going to do something a little different because, let's see, see that glare is right there. I really like to use my grid. Let's see, zoom a little bit. There we go. I really like to use my grid to line these things up to make sure that they are even. And then I'll use my heavy-duty magnets to hold them in place so they don't wiggle. I have a magnetic mat, and if you don't have a magnetic mat, well, then this step, you just want to hold them in place as good as possible. But I want them to be nice and lined up and even on the bottom so that my flower press insert is even. So I'm going to put those in and hold it in place. Then I'll put my spacer in, and I'll use the grid on my mat again to line this up and make sure they are straight, even, and equidistant. So my spacer helps there. And then just our heavy duty magnets. They are heavy duty, as you can tell. They easily grab, and say they moved. Okay, easily grab through the chipboard to the mat below. And there we go. All right, so now you can see I've got about, I guess this is just a little, if I look on here, this is a little less than 1/4 inch, and that's about right. It can be a little bit closer. Anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 is absolutely fine. So you can see I've got that distance there. Now these were 6 inches high, so at about 3 inches, I am going to mark the line because I don't eyeball great. I'm going to mark it here and make sure those are even here and here. And again on the end, I'm just making small little pencil marks so that when I lay the lace down, because I'll use lace for this, or your ribbon or your string or whatever it is you're using, that you're gluing it down straight. Bottom line is you want to glue it down straight. And that is your next step. So step 1 was cut, step 2 was cover, step 3 is to put your lace in place. And here I have this little bit of lace. This one says it is 2 feet, so 2 feet long. I was just using what I had. I don't know if there's a magic number. You definitely want it to wrap all the way around, and you want to be able to tie it. So, your seam binding or your lace, whatever you're using, you want it to be able to do that. Oh, this lace may not be the best because it's got it's got a solid seam at one end and then not at the other. Well, that's okay. You know what? It'll still work. So now I'm going to lay the glue right here along those marks that I just made. And so I'll lay my piece of lace right in between that to make sure it's mostly centered. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it to be mostly centered. And I also want to make sure I have room at each end so that it's about the same so that I can tie it. Okay. And then I'll use, again, my bone folder because it's cleanable. I use baby wipes. I keep them on my desk and I can clean it off. And I'll just use that to press it down to hold it in place. Okay. Next step, again, not perfect, but it's tacked in place, is the spine. That's my next piece. And this is where I'm going to use my Tyvek, and then I have just a scrap piece of that same paper. I'm going to take this scrap piece. This is, I think, about 3 inches, which gives me plenty of overlap on both the right and the left. It's about 3 inches. I'm going to just fold it over and put the Tyvek in the center. Maybe the Tyvek is a little wider. No, it's about the same. I just guesstimated and cut a strip of Tyvek. Just going to put down a little bit of glue stick to get the Tyvek in there. And then I'll do the same thing. A little bit of glue stick to hold the paper down to the Tyvek. Okay, dropped that. Okay, so there you go. I've just covered it both sides with Tyvek, and I dropped my cap to my glue. I'll put that away. I'm done with the spacer. I can move that. All right, next up, I'm done with those, done with this. Okay, now, next, I'm going to put these bar magnets back because, oh no, you can see I moved it. Dang it. I didn't want to do that, but that's okay. I will have to use my spacer again. I moved it when I lifted up the bar magnet. Okay, I'll double check. I want these to be in place. I want them to be in the same. I want my tops and bottoms. I'll just put these right here. There we go. That'll get it out of my way. Okay. Now I'm going to take, well, it's too long, so I'm going to cut it. Now remember, this is a little bit directional, so I want to make sure I don't mess up the direction. This is 6 inches, so maybe I'll do this at 5 3/4 or something. It doesn't have to go all the way to the top and the bottom. It can go just a little bit below it or all the way to the top and bottom. It truly doesn't matter. You just are creating a spine. And I didn't measure, so let's see if this is going to work. It's a little too long, so I've got to trim off a little bit more. I'm just pulling this aside to trim off that extra bit. If you are an inker, I highly recommend you ink the top and the bottom now, right here, because those will show, and you can ink all the rest of it later if you're wanting to ink it. But you definitely, if you're going to ink it, you need to ink it before you seal it with a matte medium if you're going to go that route. But I wanted to put the ink on the top and bottom. Now I will double check, because I did wiggle it when I lifted it. Double check that it's mostly straight, and I'll glue in my spine. Hinge, spine, whatever you want to call it. Checking to make sure my paper's going in the right direction and that it's equidistant from the top and the bottom. Doesn't have to be perfect, but about the same here. It looks like it's about 1/4 of an inch, between 1/4 and 1/8 off of each. Now you can see it hangs over a little bit more on the right side than the left side. Honestly, does not matter in the least, because that's going to be covered. You just want to make sure that it's not right near the edge. And I'm going to glue those pieces down because I want it to hold nice and tight. So I'm going to go back in and glue those corners down. And while I'm gluing that, I'll put the magnets. Again, you can hold it in place. I'm using the magnets simply so that I can do something else while that is drying. All right, and then the last step is taking our 2 inside pieces. Again, I'm going to double check. There's an F here, so I want to make sure for French, I think, maybe that's what it says. I want to make sure that, here it is too, friends, French, I'm not sure. I want to make sure they're going the same way. So now I'm going to ink this. Ink. No, Corey, you're not going to ink it. You're going to glue it. I'm going to glue all the way. I'm not going to go all the way to the edge, but I am going to go about, I don't know, 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I am going to put glue all over the whole thing because I want it to hold nice and tight. And I'm using this glue as opposed to glue stick simply because it's a sturdier glue. It has a stronger hold. All right, glue. Now I'll move this and this. And this should be a little bit smaller than the outside, just a smidge, right? And it is, and I just lay it flat. And I'm going to use those heavy bar magnets again to hold it in place while it dries. All right, so that one is done. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one right here. Excuse me. And again, glue of preference. If I had an industrial strength machine, sewing machine, I would absolutely sew the front to the back. My machine is good and sturdy, but it's not sturdy enough to sew through thick chipboard. You can sew by hand if you like to, just, use the Tim Holtz or whatever punch and pre-punch holes and then sew it by hand. But the glue works just fine as well. If I were just using the thin chipboard, then I could sew it. My machine would handle that, no problem. But because I use the thick, because I use the thick chipboard, it would send my machine into fits. I don't want to break it. I really like that machine. All right, lined up, centered, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll use those heavy-duty magnets for just a moment, just to give it a second to, adhere. And that is essentially it. Now it's ready to sew in the center of my signature. The other thing I do, and I'll show you on this one while that's sitting there. The other thing I do is I'll come around and use these quilt clips. Now, if you're new to my channel, you may not have seen it. These quilt clips have little teeth on the ends, right here and here, because they're designed to hold fabric. And those will puncture your paper and give you teeth marks on your paper. So what I do is I take an emery board and I just smooth those down. So now I don't, when I clamp it like this, let's see, can you see that? I won't end up with teeth marks on the bottom of my page. I won't see those little teeth marks. So there's just a tip for you. And then what I'll do next is just clamp this all the way around and make sure it's good and dry. And then I'm done. I'm ready to put this inside the center signature of my Life Simplified journal. All right, if you made it that far, thank you. You can use this anything, any size. You can press, whatever you like in it. So thank you to Jibid for the fabulous idea, and thank you for watching. Take care and happy creating.